He had a good job, solid friendships, a clear head, and then he met her. Within 18 months, Daniel was skipping gym sessions he used to live for, apologizing for things he didn't do, and lying to his closest friends about how the relationship was going. Not because she screamed at him or threw things, because it was all so gradual he didn't notice the slope until he was already at the bottom of it. By the time the relationship ended, he barely recognized the version of himself that walked out. This channel, brutal relationship, exists because too many men are living that story right now and have no idea. No fluff, no feel-good nonsense. Just the unfiltered truth, early enough to matter. Now, let's get into the 10 red flags most men walk right past, and why missing them costs more than the relationship. Red flag 1. She punishes you for having a bad day. Relationships aren't always going to be sunshine. Both people will have off days, stressed, withdrawn, quieter than usual. That's not a problem. That's just life with another person. Watch what happens when you're the one having the hard day. When you come home drained, or you're short in conversation, or you just need to decompress without explaining yourself. Does she give you space like someone who understands you? Or does she make your bad mood suddenly about her, pouting, withdrawing, making you feel like you owe her an apology for not showing up perfectly? Pay attention to that, because what you're watching isn't her having feelings. Everyone has feelings. What you're watching is whether she can tolerate the natural imperfections of a real human being, or whether your emotional state is constantly expected to orbit around her comfort. And here's the part most guys don't catch early on. When you experience this pattern, your brain starts adjusting without you consciously deciding to. You start performing okayness even when you're not okay. You curate your mood around her. You stop being honest because honesty triggers a whole new problem to manage. The cost of that, compounded over a year or two, is exhaustion at a level that's hard to explain to someone who hasn't lived it. What's your move here? The next time life genuinely beats you up, a rough week, a difficult conversation at work, something that just gets under your skin, let yourself be real about it around her. Not dramatic, just honest. See whether she meets you with warmth or whether the room changes temperature. That response is a window into the entire future. Red flag 2. Every single person from her past wronged her. In the first few months, you're naturally going to learn her history. Exes, old friendships that fell apart, family tension, workplace drama, that's normal. What isn't normal is when the storyline is always identical. She was always the reasonable one, and everyone else was always the problem. Stop and sit with that for a moment. If the cast of characters changes across a decade of her life, but the plot never does, she's always the victim, they're always the villain. The math eventually stops adding up. Because here's what's actually being revealed. She hasn't developed the capacity to look at her own role in conflict. And that capacity matters enormously in a long-term relationship because you two are eventually going to conflict, repeatedly, as all couples do. The question is whether she can hold herself accountable when that time comes. A woman who's genuinely done the work on herself will tell you stories where she admits fault, where she says she could have communicated better, or that she was going through something that made her difficult. Those admissions aren't weakness. They're signs of someone who has perspective on their own behavior. Their absence is a signal, a loud one. What's your move? Ask her about a situation from her past that didn't go her way. Not an interrogation, just a natural conversation. Listen for any form of self-reflection. Even, "I probably could have handled it differently," is significant. If those words never appear across multiple stories, that pattern is going to land in your lap, eventually. Red flag 3. She weaponizes what you shared in confidence. There's a stage in every deepening relationship where you start opening up. You share the things that shaped you, past failures, insecurities, fears you don't talk about with most people. That vulnerability is how real intimacy is built. It's a healthy thing. But notice carefully what happens with those disclosures during an argument 6 months later. Does she fight about the issue in front of her? Or does she reach into the vault of personal things you shared and use them as leverage, throwing your insecurity back at you when she wants to land a blow, referencing the thing you told her in a quiet, trusting moment as a rhetorical weapon in a heated one? This behavior, and it's worth being clear about this, fundamentally changes the relationship's architecture, because once it happens, some part of you knows the vault isn't safe, and you stop filling it, not consciously, not as a decision you make. You just gradually stop sharing the deeper stuff. You keep things surface level, and then, over time, the intimacy hollows out, and neither of you can quite name why. The cruel irony is that men who pull back after experiencing this often get labeled as emotionally closed off, when in reality they learned, correctly, that opening up had a consequence. What's your move? After your first real disagreement, look back at what she brought into it. Did she address the actual conflict, or did she go after your character, your history, your soft spots? That distinction tells you whether you're dealing with someone fighting to resolve something or someone fighting to win at any cost. Red flag 4. Affection is something you have to earn. Standards in a relationship are healthy. Wanting effort and intentionality from a partner is completely reasonable, but there's a version of this that quietly becomes something else, where warmth and affection aren't a consistent baseline, but a reward that gets issued when you perform correctly. You'll feel this as a low hum at first. She's cold after you planned the wrong kind of evening. She pulls back when you didn't text at the right frequency. She's distant when you prioritized something she didn't rank the same way. And then she softens again once you've corrected the behavior. It's never said out loud. It's entirely communicated through temperature. What that creates over time is a man who is constantly recalibrating himself around her approval. You start making choices not based on what you actually want or think is right, but based on what will keep the warmth on. That's not love. That's a conditioning system, and you're the one being conditioned. The psychological term for this is intermittent reinforcement. Reward and withdrawal in unpredictable cycles. It creates a specific kind of attachment, anxious, hyper-focused, and incredibly hard to detach from, even when you know something is wrong. It's the same mechanism behind a lot of compulsive behavior, and it's not a coincidence when it shows up in relationships. What's your move? Notice the pattern around your inevitable imperfect moments. When you fall short of an expectation, as every human being occasionally does the affection fluctuate drastically? Or does she stay fundamentally warm toward you, even while being honest about her frustration? That consistency is what a secure relationship actually feels like. Red flag 5. Your other relationships. Make her uncomfortable. At some point, you're going to want to spend a Saturday with your old friends, or have a long phone call with your brother, or prioritize a family obligation. And a woman who is genuinely secure in herself and in the relationship will have no problem with that, because she understands that a man with a full life is a better partner, not a competing one. But notice whether a pattern develops where those moments consistently come with a cost. She's not demanding you cancel. She's just quietly not okay when you come back. There's a subtle withdrawal, a comment that doesn't quite land as a joke, or a new emotional crisis that seems to surface specifically in the window when you're otherwise engaged. What happens gradually is that you do the mental math. It's less friction to stay in. It's easier to decline the invitation. And over months, you drift from your people, not because she forced you to, but because the friction made it simpler to disengage. Fast forward 2 years, and your entire social world is her. Your friendships have atrophied. Your family feels distant. And if the relationship ends, as relationships sometimes do, you resurface into a life that's been quietly hollowed out around you. Worth being direct about something? Here, isolation is one of the most consistent warning signs in relationships that eventually become genuinely unhealthy. It rarely starts with control. It starts with friction, guilt, and the gradual rewiring of what feels easier. What's your move? Protect your external relationships with the same energy you bring to the one you're building with her. If she respects you, she'll respect that those relationships matter. If protecting them creates consistent conflict, that's your signal. Red flags. Your wins make her complicated, not happy. A partner who is genuinely in your corner has a specific quality. Your success doesn't threaten them. They can sit across from you and be fully, cleanly happy about something good happening in your life. No asterisk attached. Watch for the version of support that comes with a slight edge, the compliment that has a qualifier, the enthusiasm that lasts about 3 minutes before shifting to skepticism or a new problem. The way a milestone you were excited about somehow doesn't quite get its moment before something else takes over. This isn't always malicious. Sometimes it's unconscious, coming from someone whose self-worth is fragile enough that your growth triggers their insecurity, but the source doesn't change the effect. If your ambition, your momentum, or your success consistently creates complications in the relationship, you will eventually start muting yourself, playing smaller than you're capable of, downplaying wins because it's just less complicated that way. And that, over years, is a particular kind of loss, because you stop becoming who you could be, not because someone stopped you, but because the relationship environment quietly made ambition feel like a liability. What's your move? Pay attention to the ratio over time. Genuine enthusiasm versus subtle friction when things go well for you. One conversation proves nothing, but a consistent pattern across 6 months tells you whether she actually wants and you to rise, or whether your growth makes her smaller in her own mind. Red flag 7. Saying sorry is always a negotiation. An actual apology is simple. Something happened, it caused harm. The person who caused it owns it, without conditions, without immediate redirection toward what you also did wrong, without dissolving into the question of whether you've forgiven them yet. That simplicity is rarer than it should be. Watch the structure of her apologies when she's genuinely in the wrong. Does it land clean? Or does every acknowledgement arrive with a but attached, a pivot back toward your behavior, your tone, your contribution to the problem? Does saying sorry seem to require you to immediately say it back, turning accountability into a transaction? Does she apologize and then, within minutes, reopen the conflict as if the apology entitled her to a clean slate while the issue remains unresolved? The reason this matters beyond the surface irritation is that repair is everything in a long-term relationship. Two people will hurt each other. The question is whether both people can genuinely metabolize what happened and move forward with it actually resolved, or whether every rupture just gets covered over with a thin layer of formality while the resentment builds underneath. When accountability is consistently absent, the unresolved stuff accumulates. It comes out sideways. It poisons future conversations that shouldn't be complicated. And eventually, the relationship carries a weight that nobody officially put there, but that both people feel. What's your move? Notice what follows the apology, specifically what comes after the word sorry. If it's consistently followed by, but you have to understand, or a rapid pivot to your faults, file that. One instance might just be a bad moment. A pattern across multiple conflicts is a window into how much self-reflection is actually available. Red flag 8. She doesn't exist much outside of you two. When someone orbits their entire life around a relationship from very early on, it can read as devotion. It feels like you matter enormously to her. And maybe you do. But at a certain point, you have to ask, who is she when she's not with you? Does she have friendships she maintains independently? Goals she's working toward that have nothing to do with the relationship? Interests she'd pursue even if you weren't there? A sense of self that pre-existed you and would continue after you? If the answer is mostly no, if you've become the organizing principle of her entire existence, that's not a compliment. It's pressure. Because a person without an independent identity doesn't bring a full self to a partnership. They bring a need for you to complete them. And that need is not something any one person can sustainably meet. What ends up happening is that your normal, healthy desire for some personal space, a few hours alone, a project that's yours, time to decompress, starts. Reading is abandonment. Every step back feels like rejection because you're not just stepping back from a partner, you're stepping back from someone whose entire sense of stability is wrapped up in your proximity. That dynamic doesn't get better by you becoming more available. It only gets better with genuine individual growth on her part. What's your move? Look at what she's building independently. Her own friendships, her own pursuits, her own relationship with who she is outside of you. That's not a competition with what you two have. It's what makes a real partnership sustainable. Red flag 9. Your limits don't quite stick. You communicate something clearly, a boundary around your time, your space, something you're not comfortable with. You say it calmly, you say it once, You're not aggressive about it. And then watch what happens. Does she hear it and adjust, even if she'd prefer things differently? Or does the boundary quietly become a project, tested incrementally, worn, down through persistence, guilt, or subtle reframing until eventually it simply stops existing? Every limit that doesn't hold teaches something, not intentionally, but the lesson lands anyway. It teaches that your stated needs are a starting position in a negotiation, not an actual expression of what you need. And once that's the operating assumption, you'll find yourself in a relationship where you're continuously defending your own basic requirements from someone who theoretically loves you. Also worth naming something here that often goes unsaid. A man who repeatedly doesn't hold his limits isn't just being walked over. He's also contributing to the dynamic. But if you hold your limit clearly and the response is guilt-tripping, escalation, or a slow erosion campaign, that's the red on who you're dealing with. What's your move? Early in the relationship, communicate a real preference or limit clearly, not a test. Just don't suppress a real need in order to keep things smooth. See how she receives it. Does she treat it as information about you, or does the process of wearing it down begin almost immediately? Red flag. 10. You've become responsible for her emotional weather. This one is worth sitting with because it's the most subtle and it does the deepest damage. Everyone has emotional complexity. Good days and hard days, internal storms that have nothing to do with what's happening between you. That's not a problem. That's what it means to be a person. What becomes a problem is when, over time, managing her emotional state becomes an unofficial second job you never applied for. You start gauging her mood before you say anything important. You choose your words based on what will keep things calm rather than what's honest. You make decisions about your time, your priorities, your behavior, not based on what you actually want, but based on what reduces friction in her internal world. And slowly you've handed over the steering wheel of your own choices to her emotional temperature. The psychological reality of this is that it erodes your sense of self in a specific, quiet way. You become reactive. You lose the thread of your own instincts because you're so tuned into hers. And when the relationship eventually ends, or even just during it, there's a strange disorientation that comes from trying to figure out what you actually want, because you've been prioritizing someone else's feelings for so long that your own preferences have gone quiet. Being a supportive partner is real. Being someone's emotional support system when they're going through something. That's what partnership is. But there's a clear line between that and being held responsible for every mood shift, every bad day, every internal struggle she hasn't learned to carry herself. What's your move? Check in with how you feel, not during the highs, but during regular, ordinary moments. Do you feel free to be yourself? Do your instincts feel intact? Or do you feel like you're perpetually managing something you can't fully control? That answer isn't overthinking. It's a reading on the relationship that deserves to be taken seriously. Across all 10 of these, the common thread isn't that these women are bad people. Most of the time, they're not. The common thread is patterns, consistent, repeated behaviors that compound quietly until the person who entered the relationship, confident and self-assured, barely remembers what that felt like. Daniel eventually saw it. Not cleanly, not all at once, but he saw it. And the first thing he said once he had enough distance to be honest was, "The signs were there in the first 3 months. I just kept choosing not to read them." You don't have to make that choice. If this landed for you, share it with the guy in your life who's in the middle of something he can't quite name. Sometimes having the words for what you're already sensing is the thing that changes everything.